So, here's a couple of quotes from this participant. I translated them into English. And she says that here in California or in LA, I could spend all of my paycheck on makeup if I wanted to, and no one can tell me anything because it's my money. I earned it. You know, this is creating a new consciousness of autonomy, a new type of woman that is not chapaneca anymore. Another quote is, she talks about, I came here to become a radio conductor because back home, girls only go to school to find husbands and not to study. And so that becomes a problem because then that means that they are being deliberately dislocated. Their parents are assuming and are pushing them into a role that is really not theirs. They haven't yet experienced what it is to be young, and that becomes a problem. She becomes conscious of this, and this propels her to exit. So my hypothesis is Mayan youth transformed their identities through youth practices and urban cultural options offered by the city of Los Angeles. So studies on youth cultures that focus on locality can shift the way we understand and study youth identity formations in the world. So when we talk about youth cultural practices, we talk about, for example, the makeup culture. I like to bring up the kabuki club kids, which were really famous during the 80s, and it's a really big scene in LA now with the big club kids and the rave and the dubstep and two-step, whatever. We also have like the dance culture, which dance has been forever like a really interesting part of LA culture. And of course, tattoo culture. LA cannot go without tattoo culture, which happens to be one of the most trendiest things right now. It's no longer a symbol of rebellion or a single of kind of gang affiliation. It becomes this more like a trendy commodification of what it is to be different. So when we talk about urban cultural options, and as far as participant one in her stage where she develops this identity, we talk about, again, the club, and Los Angeles being characterized by offering youth urban cultural options such as clubs, venues, bars that enable you to contest these newly formed identities. What does it mean to contest identities? It means that, well, I'm back home looking at myself in the mirror, you know, like, this is my identity. But when I come out, I'm contesting it because I might look at myself a certain way, but that doesn't mean that you're going to look at me that way, right? So when you look at me different, that automatically reshapes the way I'm looking at myself through you, you're looking at me through you, right? So that's how identities are contested on an everyday level with everybody. And that kind of brings us into participant number two. Participant number two is a UCSC student, which I was able to meet him during one of my classes. And I discovered that he was from Yucatan, and I also discovered that he migrated really young. So I thought, you know, why not interview him? So he agreed to an interview, and it was really interesting. Compared to the first participant, this participant was a bit younger when he migrated. He migrated at the age of 12. So he was actually able to experience youth in San Francisco in the Mission District. So when he arrived, he did not speak English. He spoke Mayan, a little bit of Spanish, and it was a conflict because coming here to San Francisco, he realized that there was traffic lights, there was regulations, there was rules, there was people telling you what to do, where to walk, where not to enter. And that was a problem because in certain communities, we are not as surveillanced as we are in the big cities. You know, so that became an issue, especially when it came to interacting and to finding ways, networks within this community to survive because he lacked the language. So in his situation, he was able to join like a Mayan cultural, like a Casa de la Cultura style, where he was able to engage in dance forms. So I asked him, like, why is it that you joined this particular group in particular? He's like, well, you know, it was interesting because in school, you know, I didn't fit in, I didn't speak the language, and like people made fun of me and stuff like that. And I figured that through dance, nobody can judge me because it's the essence of myself rather than what I'm trying to convey through language, which people can reinterpret and just label you depending on how you're saying things or how you're not saying them. So I thought it was interesting kind of seeing his identity as this kind of child developing in Yucatan and his full transformation in San Francisco, where he becomes this full-on dancer in this space. So this is a quote from him that I really liked, and it talks about dancing. And he says, I sometimes forget that when you are choreographing life, there's a rehearsal period and everybody knows which part they are supposed to play. In life, it is easy to overcomplicate things or to try too hard to control other people. And then there is a chance you might be left alone in your own dance where you are the only one who knows the steps. So this is really clear about everybody, At one point, when we choose not to follow the rules and when we choose not to follow regulations, we understand that that path is only ours. And we know that path, and nobody else knows that path but us, right? The way we know it. And so his stage becomes the actual stage, which for any performer, the stage is the most intimate space where the talent, the identity, and the essence of the self are revealed through physical movement. So how does migration influence this identity transformation? So the transformation that occurs during the following migration is the most important part of this process. To identify how identities transform, we must look closely at these two events that set the conditions for identity reinvention, which are locality and migration. As we analyzed before, through experiences and self-awareness, transformation happens before migration, which is sometimes propelled by the same. I learned that as youth embark on the journey to the United States, they must travel through different spaces, to different temporal spaces, or what I like to call worlds, in order to arrive at their final destination. This phenomenon could be described as what Professor Cruz calls peeling the layers of identity. Thus, on departure, the amputation of his being vanishes as the ocean liner comes into view. Leaving behind old ways, values, morals, and tradition means to experience a new way and a new array of identification options offered by these transitory spaces, and thus the last phase of migration is arrival. So I really like this quote because Frantz Fanon is kind of looking at kind of like French migration kind of going into France and kind of the identity conflicts. It's really like the Chicano conflict, the Chicano question. So the limitations to this study is that anthropologists will argue that this study lacks quantity of interviews that a true qualitative work might require. So I'm looking at transforming this in more like a specific case study research analysis. So to conclude, my conclusion, or what I found to answer my question, was that Mayan youth transformed their identities through youth practices, such as wearing makeup, through fashion and dance art, as migrating becomes the facilitator or engine that drives identity transformation. Locality determines the progression of the stage of youth development. This means that identity could be displaced depending on a social factors such as war, slavery, and poverty in a specific context, contesting the idea that youth develops in a linear fashion. This means that I might not get to experience youth at my stage, but if I get the opportunity, maybe through migration, maybe through economic upward mobility, I might be able to revisit that stage, maybe at a later time, at 30, at 35, at 40, which means that people that are 30 and are acting like children are not necessarily immature. They might just had a tough life, and we're dislocated as young people, So I just would like to thank everybody for coming out and just giving the time to share yourselves with me. And one last thing, I would like to end with this. We must not waste our time to bloom in suffering and in despair. We must use our vitality to change the world by exploring ourselves in it, constructing ourselves in harmony of communities within it, and by embracing the rainbow of cultural spaces through which we experience our coming of age. It is the eternal essence of youth and not the conformism of adulthood that keeps our hearts beating. It is this freedom that keeps us creating, transforming, and shifting the new world that is enabling young people to finally have a voice. It is this voice that is going to change the world, and it is this voice, the revolution. Thank you.